Welcome to Cartoon Creators, where we talk to the minds behind the shows that raised us. I'm your host, Tamar Lilienthal. And today we're talking to Scott Kraft, perhaps best known for being the executive producer of Paw Patrol. But wait, aren't we a show about kids' TV in the late 90s and early 2000s? Yes. And Scott is also known for writing on Roly Poly Oly and co-creating the hit live-action musical series for Nickelodeon, The Fresh Beat Band. In this episode, we talk about his start in kids' media, the gaps he saw in content and how he filled them, and of course, how he ended up as the EP of the biggest preschool hit of the decade that we all know and love. Let's get the episode started. Scott, thank you so much for being here today. Really excited to chat.
My pleasure.
And so I guess we'll start off. I've asked all of our guests this, but everyone has a story of how they ended up in the kids TV industry, the kids space. So, what's yours? And in your case, I must ask, because we share an alma mater, which is very exciting to me. Did Penn play any role in that?
Weirdly enough, Penn did play a role, but it was pretty inadvertent. Penn now has like a really vibrant kind of film and television and CGI animation department, and a lot of people that are in the engineering have gone on to do a lot of CGI. When I was there back in the dark ages, that was really there was very little on the creative writing side, and there was nothing at all on the film and television side as far as academics. So yes, it was super well regarded for its English department, for its literary criticism, but it did not really have any, like the Kelly's Writer House didn't exist.
Oh, wow.
There was no film and television department. I happened to have had a buddy who was really into film and TV. And there was a professor at the time, Mark Crispin Miller, who's at NYU now, and actually went down to Hopkins to start their film department from Penn, because Penn didn't tenure him. And he was doing these courses. He did a Hitchcock course and a Kubrick course. And this buddy of mine was like, you just go watch movies, And it was really, Mark Crispin Miller is pretty well regarded as a critic and a pop critic, and he was really great. He was a great professor. So I took those courses, and they sort of got me mildly interested. Although I was working KOW radio ever since high school, and I really thought I was going to end up as a kind of CNN journalist, kind of travel the world and do interesting stories for, I don't know, Blitzer or whomever as a producer, and Christina Amanpour or something, and. Then I took a couple of drama as literature courses, and that kind of got me interested a little bit too. But I never really thought of it as a career at all, or even something you went off and did. And then I stumbled into became an accidental actor, sort of in a backwards kind of way, and did some acting jobs, and I never really had any particular interest in being an actor, but I was getting work. And so I went to New York, and I was like, all right, I'm going to I'm going to do this thing for 10 years. I'll be a millionaire. And then I'll go off and write novels in New Hampshire and, be that guy. And of course, the way it always works, once I sort of tried to get work, I didn't get any work at all as an actor for like 5 years, but I studied in New York, and I fell into this theater crowd that I really liked. And I really started enjoying theater. And so I started writing plays, and eventually kind of made some money as an actor, enough to make me have to go to LA to make sort of a living at it. But I was doing theater the whole time. That really got me into writing and writing narrative fiction, linear fiction as a kind of passion. And then once I started kind of trying to live as an adult, theater did not pay the bills particularly at all. It was generally a money loser. You usually were working with theater companies that, required you to put a lot of time and effort into things for no money at all. So then made the natural move into film and television, and started doing that for pay, and that worked out reasonably well. I did my first kind of real thing was this kind of culty B movie thing called The Silencer that a friend of mine was directing and needed someone to help her with the script, and so I came in and we quickly wrote and shot this thing, and that led to more opportunities, and so I was doing a lot of grown up television, hour TV. Or certainly young men television. I did a thing called Lost World, a couple episodes, and Beastmaster and Queen of Swords, and I had development deals at MTV and CBS, and did another movie. And then my wife and I had our first kid, and my wife also writes and was on a very similar trajectory. We met at a playwrights workshop, and we did theater companies together, and we were sort of, doing that whole thing. And she had also started to get a grown-up TV career as well, and she was writing our shows. And then we had our first kid, and when our eldest was about 8 months old, we went to do this art movie that we had all kind of worked on together, low budget thing that we were asking all our friends to be in. And my wife thought she was ready to go back to work. And the thing about television or film in general, and especially when you're sort of wearing all the hats yourself, is the time commitment's insane. And so it was 18 hours on the floor of the film with an 8-month-old. And about halfway through, she realized, like, okay, I really could not go back to this lifestyle. So she had been offered Roly Poly Oly, this animated kids show. She had worked on a live action show for the same producers previous to having our kid, and she didn't really want to do animation. She didn't think didn't want to do preschool, but they were like, well, you can do it from home. And she went, oh, she had turned it down, and they came back to her and she said, okay, meet Bill Joyce, the illustrator who was doing it. And she met Bill, who's an amazing guy, who's just a genius and a incredible talent. And she just really, really dug him. So she was like, okay, I can do this. I'm going to do this. And then she was doing that, and I was still doing regular television. And then they doubled her order, and she's like, you have to help me.
Wow.
Oh, no, I'm not doing kids animation. No way. And I started doing it. I was like, oh, this is fun and actually really good. And Bill is just an amazing talent. And to be able to kind of work with him and try and get out of his head and onto the page this world that he created was really a blast. So that kind of started it. And then I was also able to work from home as well. And other kids who I was able to be mostly, not completely. We did a thing called the Fresh Beat Band that was at Paramount Studios for a couple of years. So I had to go in for that. But generally, I was able to be kind of stay at home dad while also working full time. And it was pretty ideal, actually. I mean, it was hard. There were a lot of nights of putting the kids to sleep and then going back to work from 9 to 1 in the morning. That was pretty constant, but at least I got to see my kids wake up in the morning and pick them up at school and, generally have dinner with them and stuff like that. So.
No, that's incredible. I mean, I'm like sitting here stunned by that story and by so many parts of it. First of all, that it was that your wife is primarily the reason you ended up in the kids space, which is pretty
all her fault. It was
pretty remarkable, yeah. And number two, I think it's so popular now to kind of talk about different work environments and how so many companies and so much of our industry has gone back to sort of mandating in person in a post-COVID world. And it's like, oh, people did the at-home thing in the 90s and they figured it out. So.
Oh, yeah, no, it was amazing. I have to say the production company Nelvana in Toronto, they were amazing with Nadine, my wife, as far as making it possible for her to work and have a family life. They agreed early on even that if they needed to fly her into Toronto for over like 3 days, I don't remember what the number was, they would actually fly our daughter up with her.
Wow.
Yeah, babysitting. I mean, they were incredible. They're just so progressive and so forward. thinking, and without them, I don't think any of it would have actually been possible. But they were just really willing to let her, work on her hours, and she's a great writer, so she was worth it and worth it to them, and so that was very fortuitous. And then I was just able to like ride her coattails. That was uh, that was pretty fun.
That is awesome. That is awesome. We'll have to have her on the podcast.
Yeah, for sure. No, she's a much better interview than me, actually.
No, 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 no. I'm so fascinated by this, and Roly Poly Oly. I think first of all, I think I mentioned this to you by email that probably like 20 years after I was a viewer of it, I can probably still sing you the theme song. So it was definitely one of my favorites. And it was a very early sort of CG show. Did that hit you all at the time? Did it impact your process at all? Like, what was that like?
Oh, it was a nightmare it was the first, I think, CGI preschool show. Like Jimmy Neutron had been done and was out there. I don't know how many others, but there weren't a lot. And again, Nelvana had gone and found this company, or this company had found Nelvana, and they had found Bill called Windlight Studios, I believe it was in Minnesota, and it was Scott Dyer and Pam Lane and a couple other folks, and it was a CGI. Very small CGI studio, but it was on the cutting edge of the new technology. And Nelvana just basically picked it up and moved it to Toronto. They all went up there as a core of 5 of them.
Wow.
And Ron Pitts and Eric, I'm not sure who else was in it. But anyway, it was a very small group, but they had this new technology. But the problem was it is, and back then it really was so computer resource heavy that there were so many things you couldn't do. And to build the world in CGI is much more like live action than 2D is, because you have to build the complete world. So we would have things like you couldn't open a closet door because they'd have to build the inside of the closet, or you couldn't couldn't angle. For the first little bit, I can't remember for how long, you couldn't see a character pick up a prop on screen because they didn't have the technology to be able to do that. So you had to it all had to be done sort of with cuts, and there was the list of things we couldn't do was just huge, and you can't add characters very easy. And still, I mean, this is still true to today. There's a reason that there's not hardly any successful full-on comedies in CGI. There's a lot of action comedies, but there's not a lot of full-on CGI comedies, and certainly none in the adult space that are particularly successful, because the restrictions on how much, like if you think of a typical SpongeBob episode, the number of changes, character changes, costumes, the number of sight gags you do, doing that in CGI is just prohibitive. You can do it at a feature scale because your economics are completely different, but to do it in a television pipeline is really challenging. You have to have a lot of money and you have to be really good at it. And so very few people will even try to do it. Action's different because you can kind of stay in the same world and it doesn't require so many sort of sight gags. But once you try and get like SpongeBob turning into, having a 6-pack and a side, and those things are all incredibly expensive and time consuming when you're doing it in CGI.
No, yeah, that makes sense. Was there any sort of intentionality behind like Roly Poly Oly, the premise to begin with? I don't know if you know, but like of being sort of like the future, and kind of how the 90s was very into that, because they were all technically like robots or something, weren't they?
Yeah, it was a robot family. It was this Bill just, Bill loves, and if you look at his stuff, he did the Robinsons, and he has a whole kind of fascination with sort of a retro futuristic, kind of 60s future aesthetic. And so Roly Poly Oly was just that sort of idea of a kind of, archetypical but never existed middle American family, that had the pappy and the mom and the dad and the boy and the girl and the dog. And, but they were in this robotic kind of idyllic future. And so it was
Yeah.
just, that's just Bill's amazing and beautiful imagination. He had just created this whole kind of world in his head, and then it was just a question of bringing it to life for him and kind of giving it a full multiple season
Yeah.
existence.
Yeah, no, and super, super successful. Then I think, how did you go from that to doing the Fresh Beat Band, which was live action, obviously, which was musical? And I think I read somewhere that you have like an Emmy for music on that show or something? Is that an
Yeah,
experience that you had?
we produced the music on that, Nadine and I,
Oh,
along
wow.
with the three guys in Matter Music, who are a composition, recording, producing studio that we work with, longtime friends of ours. Yeah, and Nadine has always been super musical, and I've always been sort of like I love music. I fumble a guitar and have for a long time. So, but Fresh Beat Band came about. So from Roly Poly Oly, actually, Nadine went over to Nick Jr. and was doing Little Miss Spider, which is a David Kirk show
Hmm.
for them. And I was doing Bill Joyce's other show, George Shrinks, for Nelvana. And then they were looking for a musical show, and we pitched them kind of an idea of originally, it was a musical Seinfeld for preschoolers where nothing happens, but these four friends just live together and do music and do things about nothing. But it evolved a little bit into a school scenario, which was kind of fun. The main drive for it came out of our daughters, and they were our youngest was maybe 3 when we were developing it coming up with the idea. And she was going to a lot of parties at the time. And at the time, it was like Miley Cyrus and High School Musical. And I mean, Hannah Montana and High School Musical were like kind of the big things. And kids were theming their party. Young kids, 3, 4, 5 year olds were theming their party that way. But at the heart of it, like High School Musical, at its heart is about hooking up. And it's like that's not even in a 3, 4, 5 year old kid's like mentality.
You're right.
She was going to these parties because she loved the style and the music and the sort of grown up thing about it. But at the same time, it really was shows aimed at a slightly older audience with a different, there were just hook up and boyfriend girlfriend jokes that just these kids aren't even like aware that that's a thing.
Yeah.
But we thought, okay, like what these kids need is sort of like the real music and real dancing and real kind of visuals and style, but that are just about things that they can relate to. And so that was the thing with Fresh Beat Band. We wanted to do hip hop, and everybody said, "Oh no, you can't do hip hop for preschoolers. It's too rough and tumble," and blah 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 blah. But of course, that's what the moms and dads were all listening to, and so as soon as we were able to by working with Nick, we were able to get like Chuck Maldonado, who had done the Step It Up movies, for the choreography, and we were able to get Neo did an episode, and Jason Mraz did an episode, and Justin Bieber
Wow.
did an appearance with them very early on,
Really?
It was like, yeah, because people want that audience, it's a great audience. The parent, and the tour was incredibly successful because moms and dads in particular were looking to like have their first kind of like music, rock and roll concert experience with their kid, and so it's
Yeah.
really, it's not like when I grew up and as soon as you could get on your bike, you tried to get as far away from your parents as possible. Kids actually like hanging out with their parents. And so That's that's what it tapped into, and Nick liked it. We did basically a presentation pilot of it. We shot a kind of truncated pilot and found a great cast, and they just really really worked. And the music that Matter Music did, we wrote about 80 songs with them, and our first album dropped at 21 on the Billboard charts.
Wow.
Yeah, which was cool, and like number one on the kids charts for months and months. We sold out the Beacon Theater 8 nights straight. They did Carnegie Hall. I mean, the tour was incredibly successful. So yeah, it was really really fun. It was just people were really looking for, and parents were looking for a musical experience to share with their kids, and something that was musically safe, and
Right.
musically not even just safe, but actually kind of focused at their kids, not, that their kids were kind of pulling themselves up into.
And no, that's incredible because I was going to ask you, like, what was the, inspiration for that? And was that sort of like a preschool, I think Lemonade Mouth was honestly the example that came to mind for me first, but that was even later, obviously, than things like High School Musical. But I guess the answer very much is yes.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I was definitely, I don't know, I was probably 5 when High School Musical premiered or something like that. And definitely, I mean, my mom says that this was kind of a constant that she, my 2 sisters are both 3 years older and 5 years older than me, respectively. And my mom always felt bad about leaving me out of things that they were doing together. And
Right.
so I would end up watching these things with them that like she didn't find to be age appropriate necessarily,
Yeah, no,
but she
that
just
was
felt too bad to say no.
right. And what we found with the Fresh Beat Band that was funny was like there were a lot of 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kids, and you'd say like, "Did you like Do you like the Fresh Beat Band?" They'd be like, "Well, it's not really my show, but I watch it with my little sister or brother. They're really into it." So it was a great way, even for siblings, to kind of enjoy something together because kids are constantly, I mean, more today even than then, but they're always getting dragged up by all of the guardrails have come off that used to be, kind of on uh, just by virtue of the fact that they're used to the whole idea of preschool and the preschool block came about because kids used to go to kindergarten,
Right, right.
and everybody would go to kindergarten at like 5 or 6, and it would leave anybody younger than that home alone, but nobody else home to watch. So the Disneys and the Nicks and the networks of the world were like, okay, there's no point putting on, kids programming that's above 5, 6 years old now because those kids are all going to school at the same time. So
Right.
we'll start running preschools. But today everything's sort of like kids start daycare and preschool and school at such different times and because things can be taped and streamed and so it's broken that barrier down. But there was a time when it was actually easier to keep kids from kind of interacting with the older,
Yeah.
and then just can't be done anymore. It hasn't for quite a while now. So
Right, right. It's interesting how things sort of constantly evolve. Definitely interesting to kind of track how things have changed over time, which I think is such a great segue into my next question. So we've talked about 90s, early 2000s stuff that you did. And, not to make you feel old, certainly not my intention, but it's very possible that some of our podcast listeners now have little ones of their own watching Paw Patrol, which you ended up as the EP on. And I would love to hear, I know I'm jumping quite a bit here, and maybe there's some in-betweens to fill in for this, but how did you end up EPing on Paw Patrol, easily, I don't know, the most successful franchise of the last decade?
I mean, it's exactly linear from where we just were, which was I was doing Fresh Beat Band. Nadine and I were doing Fresh Beat Band, and then it rolled out into Fresh Beat Band of Spies, which was an animated spinoff for Nickelodeon at the same time that they were working with Spin Master to help develop Paw Patrol. And Terry Weiss, who's now over actually at DreamWorks, she's working on the show that you might know now as Gabby's Dollhouse
Oh,
is
yes.
one that she's overseeing, but she's been at DreamWorks for a while. But she was at Nick Jr. at the time, and they were working with Spin Master at helping them develop Paw Patrol. And I had also worked with Jen Dodge at DreamWorks on a show a couple years before that as well. And so I think just the knowing both sides of that coin and it being sort of up my alley as a boys adventure show, they brought me in very early on and took Keith Chapman's designs and sort of his basic idea. And I think it was Terry who had taken Keith had adult kind of a grown-up dogs, and Terry had said make them pups. And then I came in and did the develop for television thing, which is what I kind of do. I take people's idea, or do a lot. I take people's kind of basic ideas and I create a sort of franchise track for that, so that you can, for 2, 3, 4, 5, or in this case, 12 years,
Right.
however long it's going to go. Yeah. So that it just, they brought me in to develop, which is, television development is always somewhat hit or miss, but usually pretty good when you have those kind of players in it. And so I developed it, and then it got ordered and was very quickly, it caught on really, really quickly. So it was just then when you have people like Nick and Spin Master and kind of, they're just waiting for things to hit, and then they put their machines in place. So it was, once the audience was paying attention, it was just everybody got all hands on deck and rolled it out into this amazing juggernaut that it is. So.
No, I mean, whoever's in the CP department over at Paw Patrol is.
I mean, that's what Spin Master does, right? They're a toy company. They were always just waiting for that to, they've done a number of television shows. This was one of the first ones that they did, and it just caught fire. And there was a white space for it, and Spin Master knew that and was sort of, hoping to land in that kind of empty space, and they did. And kids and pups is always a pretty attractive combination. So yeah. So that was, so I did that for 4 years, and then moved on to some other stuff.
That's incredible. So I actually, my next interview that we have on the books over here, not to kind of preview it, spoil it for the audience, but Keith and I are chatting this Friday. So
Awesome.
Definitely excited about that. It was a little tough to coordinate the time zones, but we've got that on the books finally. So
that's great.
But that's awesome. I mean, so what was that process like? I mean, whatever you can share, kind of starting with Keith's first idea, but then, developing it into what Paw Patrol became. And how has it kind of changed since you stepped off of it? Is there anything that's become different since your time there?
Oh, I mean, everything has become, still the characters, but they've gone to space. They've gone to, it's just, the development process for that and for most things is, Keith had a Bible, and he had designed what's called a Bible. He had a description of the characters and description of the world. He had designs of the characters, and that was always kind of evolving. And then Spin also had their toy designers, and they were weighing in on the design, and they had input as well, and they had sort of their asks. And then Nickelodeon and Terry, who, obviously have a lot of experience in putting together a show, had their input. And so it's a lot of give and take, back and forth. You sit in a room and you go, what about this? What about that? How about this? It's as mundane as going okay, what's the name?
Right,
this name has been taken, that name has been taken, this name has been taken, and as interesting and cool as we spent hours and hours going like, do we need to give these pups a backstory? Do we need to explain why they talk? Do we need to explain why Ralph
Mm,
has no parents and has a giant tower? And everybody has, various ideas about it, but ultimately what won out, thankfully, was the idea that like if you present it with a logic and a consistency, kids' imaginations are happy to go there. So
yeah.
we were able to do away with, thankfully, any sort of like trying to explain the backstory, trying to explain how these characters got to where they were. There was a lot of discussions about could other animal characters talk or not, and we came down on the idea that only the pups can talk. What level license do you need to drive a backhoe on the streets of Adventure Bay? There's just you have to create a coherent logic for this world, right? Especially when it's this sort of world that has a lot of normal coherent logic, but then has this completely other incoherent logic. But kids will, I mean, the willful suspension of disbelief works for whether you're 18 months old or 80 years old, and as long as you present it in a authoritative, consistent way, your audience will almost always go with it. And I think we were able to pull that off. Spin had amazing designers. Keith's an amazing designer, and Bob the Builder, he knows how to put together a show as well. And a
Right.
lot of there were a lot of people that, and this is true for successful anything, I think, which is you get a great idea and then hopefully nobody screws it up along the way. And that's it's like if there's a thing in animation, if you can plus it at every step,
Right.
then it can really become something. And I think everybody they brought in on Paw Patrol at every step, Jamie Whitney as the director was fantastic. The voice acting was really good. Pat Burns producing. I mean, there were just a lot of people who knew what they were doing, working really hard on the show, and it was a really good idea, and all of that came together.
Wow. Wow. Well, I think this is such an awesome kind of ending point for our chat. Kind of being able to take you through your journey and also hearing kind of a bit of your creative process. And just a quick funny anecdote. But when I reached out to Keith, because that our podcast is focused primarily on the 90s and the early 2000s. But of course, like I said, so many people have kids watching content now. So I reached out to him initially about Bob the Builder, and he said, you may also want to talk about another property that I've done called Paw Patrol. And I was like, yes, Keith, I am familiar with that little show you referred to.
Called what?
So yes, I think there's no way not to know about the incredible success that is Paw Patrol. So I love ending on that and kind of, hearing the journey that you and your wife have been on. So. Again, we'll have to have her at some point, but thank you so much.
You're super welcome, and thank you for reaching out. This has been a blast.
Thanks for tuning in to Cartoon Creators. We would love if you connected with us on one of our social media channels. Have a comment, question, or an idea for a guest we should bring on to the pod? Email us at info@cartooncreators.com. Both words starting with a K, of course.